Elliot Hayes had never felt smaller in his life. As the transport shuttle docked at Stardawn Academy's orbital station, he pressed his forehead to the window, watching as the school's shimmering towers drifted into view against the backdrop of distant stars. The academy was enormous, a floating city of glass and metal, with buildings that bent and twisted like the spiraling arms of a galaxy. Somewhere inside that maze was his dorm, his classrooms, and supposedly his new life, a life that already felt impossible. The shuttle door hissed open and Elliot found himself surrounded by a sea of alien students, tall insectoids with glistening exoskeletons, floating beings with luminous tentacles, and creatures that shifted colors with every step, all of them chatting, greeting old friends, or gliding down the station's moving platforms with practiced ease. Meanwhile, Elliot stood frozen, clutching the strap of his bag like a lifeline. The academy brochures had promised an inclusive, intergalactic learning environment, but Elliot already felt like a tiny Earth insect in a world too big for him. He took a deep breath and forced himself forward, scanning the alien signs glowing along the walls. They pulsed in unfamiliar symbols, some translating automatically into English, some not at all. His first task was simple: find his way to Orientation Hall A17. But as soon as he stepped off the platform and into the crowd, it became clear that nothing here was going to be simple. A creature with 4 arms and soft, iridescent fur bumped into him, muttering something that sounded like an insult. Elliot barely had time to apologize before a centipede-like alien scuttled across his path, nearly tripping him. He stumbled toward a glowing hallway, only to realize it was an elevator tube, just as a group of floating students zipped into it, laughing as the floor beneath them vanished. "Great start, Elliot," he muttered under his breath, adjusting his backpack and trying to suppress the sinking feeling spreading in his chest. After several wrong turns and a near panic attack when he stepped into a zero-gravity corridor by mistake, Elliot finally made it to Orientation Hall A17, sweaty, frustrated, and 5 minutes late. He slipped through the door and scanned the room, hoping to find a seat without drawing attention. No such luck. Every seat was occupied by students who looked like the top 1% of every planet in the galaxy. Tall, elegant beings with glimmering skin, floating above their chairs in serene silence, or sitting stiffly in ceremonial robes that looked older than Earth itself. As Elliot shuffled toward an open space at the back of the room, he noticed a pair of slitted eyes track his movements, followed by whispers from a cluster of students with sleek scales. They were Xantharians, an aristocratic race known for their pride, and judging by the way they sneered at him, Elliot figured he wasn't impressing anyone. The head instructor, a bird-like alien with metallic feathers, flicked her gaze toward him. "Ah, the human. Welcome." She didn't even bother to hide the exasperation in her voice. "Try not to disrupt things any further." Elliot's cheeks burned as the Xantharian snickered quietly. He slouched into an empty spot at the back of the room, pretending he didn't hear. It was going to be a long semester. The rest of the orientation passed in a blur. Instructors droned on about interspecies etiquette, coursework expectations, and the academy's many prestigious traditions, all while Elliot struggled to keep up. He hadn't realized just how different everything would be. Gestures, greetings, even eye contact had different meanings depending on the species you were interacting with. One wrong move could offend someone, or worse, start a formal duel. And of course, there was no shortage of alien languages and customs he was expected to understand. By the end of the day, Elliot's brain felt like it had been stuffed with static. When the dismissal bell rang, a strange melodic hum that seemed to vibrate through his bones, he grabbed his things and bolted out the door, desperate for some fresh air. But even outside, things didn't feel any better. The academy's open-air corridors floated between towers, surrounded by swirling cosmic winds and a view of distant nebulas. Most students glided effortlessly through the shifting walkways, chatting with friends, or adjusting their grav shoes to skate along the platforms. Elliot, on the other hand, nearly tripped 3 times trying to navigate the strange gravity shifts. He finally slumped onto a bench in a secluded corner of the plaza, watching as students of every shape and size passed by in groups, laughing and swapping stories about their home planets. No one even looked in his direction. He wasn't part of any group, any clique, or any familiar culture. He was just alone. The worst part was, Elliot had wanted this. He'd been so excited when he got accepted into Stardawn Academy, ready to prove that humans deserved a place among the galaxy's elite. But now, sitting on that bench with the vastness of space stretching out above him, all Elliot could think was that maybe everyone back home had been right. Maybe humans weren't ready for the galactic stage. Maybe he wasn't ready. That night, Elliot barely slept. His dorm room, which had looked sleek and futuristic in the academy brochure, now felt cold and isolating. The bed hovered slightly above the floor, humming softly as it adjusted to his weight, but no amount of comfort could shake the emptiness gnawing at his chest. He lay awake, staring at the shifting patterns on the ceiling, wondering if anyone would even notice if he just left. The next day didn't go much better. In one class, Elliot accidentally bowed too low to a Zenthari classmate, which was apparently the equivalent of groveling. In another, he misunderstood a friendly challenge from a reptilian student and almost ended up in a combat trial. Even the teachers seemed mildly irritated by his presence, as if his constant mistakes were a personal inconvenience. By lunchtime, Elliot had had enough. He grabbed a tray of alien food he couldn't identify and found a quiet corner of the cafeteria, far from the buzzing crowds. But as he sat there, picking at something purple and gelatinous, he couldn't help overhearing a conversation from a nearby table. "Humans don't belong here," one student muttered. "They're barely out of the Stone Age. Why did they even let one in? Some diversity quota, probably," another voice said with a snicker. Elliot's grip tightened around his fork. He knew coming here would be hard, but he hadn't expected it to feel this humiliating. He felt like a punchline, a novelty the academy accepted just to say they did, and worst of all, no one seemed interested in giving him a chance. He didn't know how long he sat there, stewing in frustration, before something caught his eye. A strange, flickering light, barely visible at the edge of the cafeteria, near an old rusted door marked "Staff Only." The light pulsed softly, almost like it was calling to him. Curiosity got the better of him. Elliot glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then slipped away from his table and crept toward the door. It opened with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow hallway lined with ancient books and strange artifacts. At the far end of the hallway, he saw it, another door, glowing faintly with symbols he couldn't read. With one last glance over his shoulder, Elliot pushed the door open and found himself staring at a group of alien students gathered in a dimly lit room. They all turned to look at him, surprise flickering in their eyes. One of them, a reptilian with bright yellow eyes, grinned and motioned him closer. "Well, well," the alien said. "Looks like we've got ourselves another outsider." For the first time since he arrived, Elliot felt something other than fear and frustration. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. Elliot stood frozen in the doorway, heart pounding, unsure if he should run or stay. The room before him was nothing like the academy's polished lecture halls or high-tech labs. It felt more like a hideout, dimly lit, with mismatched furniture scattered across the space. Old books and strange artifacts were stacked on shelves, and glowing wires hung loosely from the ceiling. In the middle of the room sat a group of alien students, all looking at him with varying degrees of amusement and curiosity. A reptilian alien with bright yellow eyes leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the scales along his snout curling into a grin. "Didn't think we'd be getting a human," he said. "Come in or don't, but if you stay, close the door, quickly." Elliot hesitated for only a moment, then stepped inside and let the door hiss shut behind him. The soft hum of the academy's distant machinery faded, and for the first time since he arrived, Elliot felt different. Not welcome exactly, but not dismissed outright either. That was already a step up. The reptilian nodded approvingly. "Smart choice. I'm Brune. What's your name, human?" "Elliot," he replied, awkwardly adjusting his backpack. He glanced around the room, unsure if he should sit or just keep standing. A sleek, insectoid figure with thin, spindly limbs clicked her mandibles in amusement. "You look lost, Elliot. Let me guess. You thought you'd found the staff lounge, huh?" "Not exactly," Elliot muttered, scratching the back of his neck. "I just stumbled in." "You'll fit right in then." The insectoid tilted her head. Her compound eyes glimmered in the low light. "I'm Velrix, and that's Tana over there." Elliot followed her gaze to a pale, willowy alien sitting cross-legged in the corner, her large black eyes staring into space. She seemed distracted, but when Elliot's gaze landed on her, she blinked and gave a small, hesitant wave. "Hi," Tana said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll have to excuse her," Velrix said. "Tana's telepathic, accidentally reads everyone's thoughts whether she wants to or not." "That's not fair," Tana murmured, curling her long fingers around her knees. "I don't do it on purpose. You should know that right away," Brune added, flicking his tongue lazily. "So don't think anything weird around her." Elliot blinked. This was already the strangest conversation he'd had since arriving at the academy, and that was saying a lot. Before he could say anything else, a new figure entered the room. A girl with silver blue hair and glowing cybernetic implants along one side of her face. She shot Elliot a wary glance before slumping into a chair, her mechanical arm clicking softly as she adjusted the joints. "Who's the new kid?" she asked, sounding tired. "A human," Brune replied, grinning. "Can you believe it?" The girl raised an eyebrow, then turned her gaze to Elliot. "Huh, well, I'm sorry. If you're here, that means you're one of us now." "One of who?" Elliot asked cautiously. Brune leaned forward, his yellow eyes gleaming. "The outsiders." Elliot frowned. "Outsiders? Every student here has their own clique," Velrix explained, her mandibles clicking as she spoke. "Hives, tribes, noble houses, you name it. If you fit their mold, great. If you don't, you end up here," Brune finished with a grin. Saria shot him a look. Or worse. That last comment sent a chill through Elliot. But before he could ask what she meant, Brune continued. "We don't fit the Academy's perfect little picture. Velrix thinks too much for a hive dweller. Tana can't control her abilities, so everyone's scared of her. Saria's parents disowned her when she got her implants. And me? I'm too soft for my species. Reptilians aren't supposed to be friendly." He flashed another toothy grin. "And now you," Velrix added, gesturing toward Elliot. "A human, new to the galaxy and dropped right into the middle of the most elite school in the universe. No wonder you look like you're drowning." Elliot wanted to deny it, but there was no point. They weren't wrong. "So, this is what you do?" he asked. "Sit around and bond over how much you don't fit in?" Saria smirked. "Pretty much. Sometimes," Tana added quietly. "But we do more than that." Elliot leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Brune's playful grin faded, and for a moment his gaze sharpened. "Ever notice how students just disappear?" Elliot blinked. "Disappear?" Velrix nodded. "Yeah. Happens all the time, especially to students who ask too many questions or don't fall in line." Elliot felt a chill crawl down his spine. "What do you mean, disappear? Like they drop out?" "That's what the Academy says," Saria muttered, her cybernetic eye glowing faintly. "But it's a lie. One of our own, Lyra, vanished last month. They told us she transferred to another school, but she was working on a project." Brune interrupted, his tone serious now. "She found something dangerous, and right after that, she was gone." Elliot's mind raced. He thought back to his first day at the Academy, the cold, dismissive stares, the overwhelming rules, and now this, students disappearing without warning. What was Lyra working on? "We don't know," Tana whispered. "She was looking into the Academy's records, something about missing students and disciplinary actions. But before she could tell us, she vanished." "We think the Academy leadership is hiding something," Brune said, leaning closer. "And we're going to find out what." Elliot stared at them, a mixture of disbelief and excitement swirling in his chest. They were just like him, outcasts, trying to survive in a place that didn't want them. But they weren't just surviving, they were fighting back. "So, what happens now?" he asked slowly. Brune grinned. "Now, we break into the archives." Elliot's stomach flipped. "The archives? Isn't that dangerous?" "Extremely," Velrix said cheerfully. "But if Lyra found something there, we need to see it for ourselves," Saria added, her mechanical hand flexing. "We've already got a plan. We just need a little help." Elliot hesitated, the weight of the situation settling over him. If he went with them, there was no going back. He would be putting himself at risk, maybe even end up like Lyra. But if he backed out, what was the point of being here at all? He thought of the sneers from the other students, the way the teachers looked at him like he didn't belong. This was his chance to matter, to prove that humans weren't just outsiders. They could make a difference. "I'm in," Elliot said before he could change his mind. Brune's grin widened. "Knew you had it in you, human." Velrix gave a satisfied click. "Welcome to the team." Tana smiled faintly, her dark eyes glimmering with relief. Saria just nodded, her expression unreadable, but Elliot thought he saw a flicker of approval. As they began discussing the plan to infiltrate the archives, Elliot felt something he hadn't experienced since arriving at the Academy, a sense of belonging. Maybe they were misfits and outcasts, but they were his misfits now, and together they were going to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The hallways of Stardawn Academy were eerily silent at night, lit only by the faint glow of alien glyphs pulsing along the walls. Elliot's heart hammered in his chest as he crept through the twisting corridors, his footsteps barely audible over the low hum of the Academy's automated systems. Beside him, Velrix scuttled silently on 6 limbs, her insectoid body blending into the shadows. Tana, walking just behind, kept her hands close to her temples, whispering softly. "No guards nearby. Yet. Just breathe," Brune whispered, towering over the group like a massive scaly boulder. "We've got this." Elliot wasn't convinced. Every step deeper into the restricted section of the school made his palms sweat. Breaking into the archives felt like madness, but it was the only way to find out what happened to Lyra and what the academy was hiding about the missing students. "We're almost there," Saria murmured, her cybernetic eye glowing faintly as she scanned the door ahead. She knelt beside it, her mechanical hand unfolding into delicate tools. Wires hissed and clicked as she started to bypass the security lock. Elliot swallowed hard, glancing over his shoulder. He half expected an alarm to go off, or a security drone to drop from the ceiling and haul them all away. But nothing happened. Yet. "Why do I feel like we're walking straight into a trap?" Elliot whispered. Velrix gave a dry chuckle without turning. "Because we probably are." "That's comforting," Elliot muttered. "Stop worrying." Brune grinned. "If things go bad, we'll just smash our way out. It's what I'm good at." Before Elliot could respond, the door gave a soft click, and the glowing glyphs along the edges flickered out. "Got it," Saria grinned, her mechanical hand folding back into place. "Welcome to the Forbidden Archives." The door slid open with a low hiss, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with rows of glowing data terminals, ancient books, and strange holographic displays. The air inside felt colder, untouched, as if no one had been there in years. The group slipped inside, shutting the door behind them. Elliot's eyes widened as he took in the sheer size of the archive, the history of countless civilizations preserved on glowing panels and old relics, stacked high in impossible towers that stretched toward the domed ceiling. "Stay sharp," Brune whispered, his yellow eyes flicking across the room. "They won't let us snoop around here for long." Saria walked over to one of the central terminals and waved her mechanical hand over it. The screen flickered to life, casting eerie blue light across her face. "I'll search for any records related to Lyra or missing students," she murmured, typing rapidly. "Let's see what they're hiding." Tana stood beside Saria, her fingers pressed against her temples. "I can sense the systems in here," she whispered, her dark eyes unfocused. "There's something blocking us, a defense layer. I'll try to keep it off for as long as I can." Velrix scuttled closer to Elliot, her antennae twitching. "Keep watch, human. If you see anything move, shout, or run." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Elliot muttered, shifting nervously by the door. Minutes ticked by in tense silence, broken only by the quiet clicks and taps of Saria's hacking, and the occasional hum from a holographic display flickering to life. Every second felt heavier, as Elliot's nerves grew sharper. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching them. "There," Saria whispered suddenly. "Found it." She tapped a few more keys, and a string of encrypted files appeared on the screen. One by one, she began to unlock them, her mechanical hand glowing faintly as it synced with the system. Elliot leaned in, his pulse quickening. On the screen, a list of names appeared, hundreds of them. "These are all students," Saria said, scrolling through the data. Each of them was listed as a transfer or voluntary dropout, but it's a lie. They didn't leave the academy willingly. They were erased. Elliot stared at the screen in disbelief. "Erased? What do you mean?" "They weren't just expelled," Saria replied grimly. "Their identities were wiped from the academy's records. It's like they never existed." Brune clenched his fists, his yellow eyes narrowing. "So this is what they do. Anyone who doesn't conform, they disappear, just like Lyra." Velrix clicked her mandibles in frustration. "We were right. They're getting rid of students who don't fit their perfect academy model." "But where do they go?" Elliot asked, his voice low. "What happens to them after they disappear?" Saria tapped another key, and a new file opened. The screen flickered, showing a report marked Containment Protocol. At the bottom of the file was a name, Lyra. Status: contained. "Containment?" Tana whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "They locked them away?" "It looks like some students get sent to hidden facilities," Saria muttered. "Facilities they control. They keep the non-conforming students isolated, out of sight, so they can maintain their image of a flawless academy." Elliot's stomach churned. "So Lyra isn't gone. She's still somewhere?" Saria nodded grimly. "If she's listed as contained, she's alive. But for how long? I don't know." Before Elliot could respond, alarms erupted through the archive, shrill, echoing sirens that made the walls tremble. The lights flickered red, and an automated voice droned overhead. "Unauthorized access detected. Security en route." "Time to go," Brune growled, already moving toward the exit. Saria yanked a small data chip from the terminal, stuffing it into her pocket. "I've got everything we need. Let's move." Tana winced, clutching her head. "Guards, coming from the east corridor. Take the west hall." Velric shouted, scuttling toward the door. Elliot's heart raced as they bolted through the archives, dodging between shelves and glowing terminals. The hallway outside was already shifting, the gravity fields tilting at odd angles to disorient intruders. Elliot stumbled, barely catching himself as the walls seemed to twist around him. Behind them, he heard the heavy clank of security drones closing in, their metal limbs clicking with precision. "Go, go, go!" Brune bellowed, holding the rear. Velrix led the way, her insectoid legs moving with unnatural speed as the group raced down the corridor. They burst into an open atrium just as a swarm of drones appeared, cutting off their escape. Brune let out a low growl. "You guys go ahead. No heroics," Sarya snapped, already pulling out a small device. With a flick of her mechanical hand, she threw the device into the air. A blast of electromagnetic energy erupted from it, frying the drone's circuits. "Move!" she shouted, and they sprinted through the atrium as the drones collapsed in a heap of smoking metal. Panting, Elliot followed the others into a narrow maintenance tunnel. The alarms were still blaring, and he could hear the pounding of guards closing in behind them. "We're not going to make it," he gasped, his lungs burning. "Yes, we will," Brune grinned, grabbing Elliot by the back of his shirt and hauling him forward like a sack of flour. They reached the far end of the tunnel just as the door slid shut behind them, sealing them in safety. For now, everyone collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. "That," Velric said between breaths, "was way too close." Sarya pulled the data chip from her pocket and held it up, her mechanical fingers trembling slightly. "But we got what we came for." Elliot nodded, his heart still pounding. They had the truth now, but that truth came with a price, and they weren't out of danger yet. "What do we do now?" he asked, looking at the others. Brune's grin returned, sharp and determined. "Now we fight." Back in the cramped, dimly lit hideout, Elliot leaned against the wall, struggling to catch his breath. His legs still felt shaky from the chase through the archives, and his heart hadn't stopped racing. They had done it, they'd found proof, but the real battle was just beginning. Velrix paced anxiously, her spindly legs clicking softly on the metal floor. "We need to get this out, fast. If they find us before we broadcast the files, we're done for." Tana sat curled on a cushion, her dark eyes distant. "They're already looking for us." She pressed her fingers to her temples, her voice a whisper. "I can feel them searching, scanning the hallways." "Then we don't have much time," Sarya muttered, examining the glowing data chip she'd pulled from the archives. "We need to upload these files to the student network, where everyone will see them." "Can't the Academy just block the transmission?" Elliot asked, still feeling like he was playing catch-up. Sarya shook her head. "Not if we use the right access point. The Academy can block public channels, but the Intergalactic student network is encrypted. It's student-run, with backdoors that even the administration can't control. If we get these files onto the network, the truth will spread before the Academy can stop it." Brune grinned, flexing his massive hands. "Sounds easy enough. When do we start?" "Not so fast, big guy," Sarya said. "The access point we need is in the communications tower on the north side of the campus. It's heavily guarded. We'll need to get past drones, surveillance systems, and other students if they catch us." Elliot's stomach churned. "What do you mean, other students?" Velric stopped pacing and folded her thin arms. "Not everyone is on our side, human. Some students will do anything to stay in the Academy's good graces. If they think turning us in will earn them points with the administration, they won't hesitate." Elliot swallowed hard, but he squared his shoulders. There was no turning back now. "So, we go to the tower, upload the files, and blow this whole thing wide open." Sarya smirked. "That's the idea, but we'll have to split up to make it work." She gestured to the group. "Tana and Brune will cause a distraction. Enough noise to draw the guards away from the tower. Velrix will disable the security systems. Elliot and I will go inside to make the upload." "Wait, me?" Elliot blurted. "Why do I have to go into the tower?" "Because," Sarya said, sliding the data chip into her mechanical palm. "You're new. No one expects much from you, which is exactly what we need." Elliot felt a knot tighten in his chest, but he nodded. "All right, let's do it." The plan went into action as soon as night fell. The Academy was quieter, though guards and security drones still patrolled the campus. Elliot crouched in the shadows near the entrance to the communications tower, his heart pounding as Sarya tapped commands into her wrist interface. In the distance, Brune and Tana were already making their distraction. Elliot could hear Brune's booming voice echoing across the courtyard. "Hey, bucketheads, over here!" There was a loud crash, probably Brune throwing a bench through a drone, and the alarms started blaring. Tana followed, sending waves of false thoughts into the minds of the guards, confusing them and leading them on a wild chase. "Distractions working," Sarya whispered, checking the feed on her cybernetic eye. Guards are moving. Time to go. Elliot and Saria sprinted toward the tower entrance, keeping low as Velrix's voice buzzed softly in their earpieces. Security sensors disabled. You've got about 5 minutes before the system resets. Make it count. The tower door slid open with a soft hiss, and the two of them slipped inside. The interior was cold and sterile, lined with glowing panels and humming machinery. They moved quickly, climbing the spiral staircase toward the central control room. Every step felt heavier, the weight of what they were doing settling on Elliot's shoulders. If they got caught now, it was over. At the top of the stairs, the control room door loomed ahead. Saria knelt by the access panel, her mechanical fingers working quickly to override the lock. "Hurry," Elliot whispered, glancing over his shoulder. He could feel the seconds ticking away. "Almost. Got it," Saria muttered, and then the door slid open. They stepped inside the control room, and Elliot's breath caught. Massive screens covered the walls, displaying surveillance feeds from every part of the academy. Panels hummed softly, transmitting signals to distant parts of the galaxy. At the center of the room was the main terminal, the place where they'd make the upload. Saria slid the data chip into the terminal, her eyes glowing with concentration as she navigated the system. Just a few more seconds. Suddenly, the door behind them hissed open, and Director Zaylor stepped inside. Elliot froze. The Academy's headmaster was a tall, thin alien with cold, gleaming eyes. His presence radiated authority, and the very air seemed to shift around him. "I wondered how long it would take you to make a move," Zaylor said, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You children always think you know better." Saria tensed, her hand hovering over the terminal. "You can't stop us. The truth is already here." "Perhaps," Zaylor replied, folding his hands behind his back, "but it doesn't have to be the end. For you." Elliot's pulse quickened as Zaylor's gaze settled on him. "Listen to me carefully, human. If you stop the upload now, I can make this all go away. You'll be allowed to stay at the academy. Your friends will remain unharmed." And Lyra... Zaylor smiled faintly. "She'll be returned." Quietly, Elliot's throat went dry. Lyra was alive, but Zaylor was offering a deal that felt more like a trap. Saria glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Elliot, it's your call." For a moment, Elliot hesitated. Could they really risk everything? What if Zaylor was telling the truth? What if they could get Lyra back without blowing up their lives? But then he thought about the other names on the list, the students who had been erased, discarded like they didn't matter. If they backed down now, nothing would change. The academy would keep erasing those who didn't fit their mold, and more students would vanish, just like Lyra. Elliot shook his head. He wouldn't let it happen. "No deal," Elliot said, his voice steady. "We finish this." Saria smiled, a small, fierce grin, and tapped the final command. The files began to upload. Zaylor's expression darkened, but before he could act, alarms blared again. Saria grabbed Elliot's arm. "Time to run!" The two of them bolted down the stairs, alarms screeching in their ears as Zaylor's voice echoed behind them. "You'll regret this, human." But Elliot didn't look back. The truth was out. There was no stopping it now. They burst out of the tower just as Velrix, Tana, and Brune arrived, grinning and out of breath. "Did you get it?" Brune asked eagerly. Saria held up the data chip. "It's done." Elliot grinned, his heart pounding with exhilaration. They had done it. The truth was out, and now the academy would have to face the consequences. Tana smiled softly, her dark eyes shimmering with relief. "It's over," she whispered. "Not yet," Elliot said, looking at the distant towers of Stardawn Academy. "It's just beginning." The next few hours felt like a blur, the kind that comes after doing something reckless and realizing there's no way back. Elliot and the others lay low in the maintenance tunnels beneath the academy, waiting to see if their broadcast had worked. The upload had gone through. The files containing the Academy's secret erasure program were now spreading across the Intergalactic student network, but whether it would be enough to spark change or get them all expelled, or worse, was still a question without an answer. Brune leaned back against the cold metal wall, breathing heavily. "I thought getting the files out would feel more victorious. This feels like waiting to see if a bomb goes off." "It kind of is," Velrix muttered, her antennae twitching with tension. Saria's mechanical eye flickered as she monitored encrypted messages on her wrist interface. "The files are out there. Now it's only a matter of time." "Time for what?" Elliot asked. "Time to see who stands with us," Tana whispered, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. For a moment no one spoke, the quiet hum of the Academy's systems the only sound around them. The truth was out, but the fight wasn't over. It didn't take long for the storm to begin. The first signs came through the student network, a flood of messages pinging into Saria's interface. They were from students, some confused, some outraged, and some offering immediate support. "They're talking about it." Sarya's voice was sharp with excitement. "The files are everywhere, everyone's reading them. They're sharing stories about other missing students too. Ones we didn't even know about." Elliot felt a flicker of hope. "So, it's working?" Velrix clicked her mandibles. "Depends on what you call working. The administration's not going to sit quietly and let this happen." As if on cue, a deep rumble echoed through the walls. A moment later, Tana winced and clutched her head. "They're coming," she whispered. "Guards. And drones. They know where we are." Brune grinned and cracked his knuckles. "Let's give them a warm welcome. Or," Sarya said with a smirk, "we could use the back door." She flicked a command on her wrist interface and a nearby hatch popped open with a metallic hiss. Brune pouted. "I liked my plan better. Save the smashing for later," Velrix whispered as they slipped through the hatch and into the twisting maintenance tunnels. "We need to get to the main courtyard before the academy locks the place down." They moved fast, darting through the maze-like passages beneath the school. The academy was waking up to their rebellion, and soon it would unleash everything it had to stop them. But Elliot felt a fire in his chest now, a sense of purpose that drowned out the fear. They weren't just running away, they were running towards something. When they emerged into the open air of the academy's central courtyard, chaos was already unfolding. Students of all species filled the space, arguing, shouting, and demanding answers from the teachers and administrators gathered on the upper balconies. The files Elliot and his friends had leaked were spreading like wildfire, and they weren't the only ones angry. "I've seen those reports. My brother was listed as a transfer, but I knew it wasn't true," shouted a tall insectoid student, his wings vibrating with rage. "My friend disappeared last year," another student cried. "The academy said she went home, but she never came back." The academy's faculty stood on the balconies, looking grim and overwhelmed. Director Zaylor hovered at the center of the group, his cold eyes scanning the crowd. "Everyone, return to your dormitories at once," Zaylor's voice boomed, amplified through the academy's speaker systems. "These allegations are baseless. The files you've seen are falsified, part of a malicious attack on our institution." The crowd erupted in angry shouts and jeers. "You're lying. We know what you've done," Sarya smirked. "Looks like we hit a nerve." Elliot watched the crowd swell, students uniting across species and backgrounds, demanding accountability from the academy's leadership. For the first time since he arrived, Elliot felt like he belonged. This wasn't just their fight, it was everyone's. But Zaylor wasn't done. His cold, calculating gaze fixed on the crowd, and his voice dropped into a dangerous tone. "You will disperse," he warned. "Anyone who continues to participate in this rebellion will face immediate disciplinary action." The students fell silent, a ripple of uncertainty spreading through the crowd. Some shifted nervously, glancing at each other. The academy still held power over them, the power to expel them, erase them, make them disappear. For a moment it felt like the rebellion might collapse under the weight of fear, but then Elliot stepped forward, heart pounding in his chest. He knew what he had to do. "Everyone listen," Elliot shouted, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "They're trying to scare you into giving up, but we know the truth now. If we stand together, they can't erase us all. They've been counting on us to stay divided, but not anymore." Velrix, standing beside him, let out a sharp click. "He's right. They erased our friend Lyra, and who knows how many others. But we won't let them do it again." Brune stepped forward next, his massive frame casting a shadow over the courtyard. "If anyone wants to expel me," he growled, "they'll have to fight me first." A ripple of laughter and cheers spread through the crowd, and Elliot saw other students straightening, emboldened. "Stay together," Tana called out, her voice soft but steady. "They can't stop us all if we stand as one." For the first time, Elliot saw fear flicker across Zaylor's cold, arrogant face. The crowd wasn't backing down. More students were arriving by the second, pouring into the courtyard, united by a shared purpose. Zaylor raised a hand, signaling the guards to advance, but they hesitated. Even the guards could sense the tide was turning. They knew there was no way to contain the rising tide of rebellion. Elliot met Zaylor's gaze across the courtyard. "It's over," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You can't hide what you've done anymore." Zaylor's expression hardened, but before he could respond, a voice crackled through the academy's comm system. A voice Elliot recognized instantly. "Director Zaylor," said the voice, cool and mechanical. "This is the Intergalactic Education Council. We've received disturbing reports from your academy." Sarya grinned, her cybernetic eye gleaming. "Told you the student network was good for something." Zaylor's face twisted with rage, but it was too late. The truth had spread beyond the academy's walls, and now the entire galaxy was watching. The guards lowered their weapons, The faculty stepped back, suddenly looking very small, and the students, alien and human alike, stood together stronger than ever. In the days that followed, everything changed. Zaylor was removed from his position, and a full investigation into the Academy's practices was launched. Massive reforms swept through Stardawn Academy, ensuring that no student, no matter how different, would ever be erased again. Lyra was found and returned safely, along with other students who had been hidden away. Elliot stood in the courtyard one afternoon, watching as students of all shapes and species laughed, talked, and worked together. The Academy felt different now, better. Brune clapped him on the shoulder, nearly knocking him over. "Told you we'd make it, human." "Yeah," Elliot said with a grin. "We did." Tana smiled softly. "And now you're one of us." Sarya leaned against a pillar, her mechanical hand tapping idly. "Not bad, Elliot. Not bad at all." Elliot looked around at his friends. The people who had fought beside him believed in him. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like an outsider. He belonged, and together, they had changed the galaxy.